So you might have noticed it seems like Sony keeps putting out new cameras like every few months. Technology keeps getting more advanced. They keep coming up with new features. Cameras kind of keep getting smaller. So whether you have like the Sony ZV-E1 or the ZV-E10 or ZV-E1 or even like the A7 IV or the A7S3, which we're shooting on now, all these cameras have really awesome features that set each one apart. But in today's video, we're going to take a look at one specific camera that kind of has the features from all of those cameras, and it comes in at a really good price. And that camera is the brand new Sony a6700. So the a6700 is the new camera to the a6000 series line. This is an APS-C lens, which means it's a crop sensor, not a full frame sensor. But don't let that thing fool you. This thing has a lot of awesome features, and it has a lot of things that are going to make this camera very similar to the A7R5, the ZV-E1, the A7 IV, and even the A7S III. So in today's video, we're going to take this camera down to Playa del Carmen, Mexico, where we're going on vacation. We're going to shoot a whole bunch of video. We're going to shoot a whole bunch of photography. We're going to really showcase how good this camera really actually is. So primarily, I'm going to be using the Sigma 18-50 lens. So this lens is actually kind of one of my favorite lenses for this camera because it's an 18-50, so you get a pretty good focal range. 18 is still very usable for things like vlogging, but that 50mm is a really good focal range for doing like any kind of photography or street photography. But you have a pretty good focal range between the 18-50. Keep in mind that because it's a crop body sensor camera, that's more like a 27-75mm in a full frame equivalent. But the reason I like this lens a lot is it's a 2.8, so it's really good at low light, and it's just really small. It's a very fitting lens for this camera. So we will be bringing a few different lenses with this camera, so it's not just the 18. I am going to be bringing the Sony 10-18mm lens. I'm also going to be bringing the Sony Batis 85mm. This is like by far one of my favorite lenses because it just has such a cool look to it. So we're probably going to be mostly using this lens for like portrait shots, but I'm going to be using this also for those really close-up detail shots. And that 1.8 makes this thing look really awesome. And then also we're going to be bringing the Tamron 28-200. This thing is just kind of one of my like go-to lenses for when I'm traveling because 28-200 is about as versatile as you get in a lens. So this thing has some pretty good looks, and if you can't find the focal range that works on this lens, you're not using it correctly. And then also we will be bringing that brand new Sony microphone to kind of complete the vlog setup for this. So we have the Sony M1 microphone. So anyways, guys, let's get on the plane. Let's get the heck out of here and let's get down to Mexico. So first, let's talk about some of the features that set this apart from all the a6000 series and the ZV-E10. First and foremost, this thing is now a 10-bit camera shooting in 10-bit 422, which just means that you have a lot more colors to be able to like flexibly grade footage with. It goes from like 16 million to like 1 billion colors. And that's the biggest change in this camera, is that it really adds that flexibility to be able to color grade. So because this camera has 10-bit codec, you're now able to shoot an S-Log3, which just means you're going to capture the most high dynamic range with the sensor, keeping your highlights and your shadows from clipping. And then in post, all you need to do is add that S-Log3 conversion LUT to your clip, and then it'll bring back your contrast, and then you can actually grade your footage from there. Secondly, the autofocus on this camera is drastically improved. This is now the new autofocus system that comes from the A7R5, which is now the best autofocus on the market, and this camera now has it as well. So one of the cool things about this new focus system is it actually has a bunch of different categories for different intelligent focus. So it'll do face tracking for humans, birds, animals, planes, trains, cars, insects. Like pretty much everything you would need. While we're out here, we've been seeing tons of iguanas, so we've been trying to get the eye tracking to work, and honestly it's been working really well. And the iguanas is a really good test because they literally camouflage to the environment. So it's at first it doesn't even focus to them, and then all of a sudden it catches the eye. You see the square box, and it works great. So here's some shots right here. As you can see, it just nails the focus right on the eye. Same thing with photography and video, so you're getting that focus system for both. So with this new AI autofocus system, it has now the ability to track things like butterflies and insects, where that box just completely highlights around that butterfly. It understands what the subject actually is. And this just makes it incredibly easy now to capture things like insects and butterflies in focus, which in the past has been something that's actually really hard to do. So switching over to the Bird AI autofocus, you can see that box just locks right away onto the eyeball, and then we get these incredibly sharp in-focus images of that bird. So like I said, this is now the best autofocus system next to the A7R5 and the a6700. So the third big thing that this camera has over the other 6000 series, other than the a6600, is it now has the FZ100 battery, the Z battery otherwise people call it. This thing is going to last you about 3 times as long as those old batteries from the A6000 series. So that is a huge improvement. We've been asking for this battery forever in these cameras. Now we got them. So like I said before about that battery, the other thing with that is having that battery means the grip is now bigger. So if you look at the grip here, this grip is substantially better. What it really does feel like is the full frame camera, minus maybe the bottom isn't as wide. So for me, the pinky's kind of hanging off, but other than that, this grip feels so much better than the A6400, the A6300, the A6500. It even feels better than the A6600 because it does have a little bit more of a form grip to it. So you guys will be absolutely happy to know that the grip is vastly improved on this camera. So unlike all the A6400 and A6500, this thing now does have the articulating screen. So vlogging content has never been easier. You can get photos from every angle. You can get low angle shots where you can see the screen. It just majorly improves this camera. This is something they should have had on this camera long ago, but now they do have it on pretty much all of the new Sony cameras, so that's a good plus. So this camera does have a new sensor on it. It does share the sensor with the FX30. It's a 26 megapixel sensor, so you're going to have better photography, not by a lot, but it's going to be a little bit crisper. And it does have a dual ISO for video, so you have a base ISO of 800 and also 2500. What that means is that the image is going to start getting noisier the more ISO that you add until it gets to 2500, and then it kind of like resets again back to its like cleanest image. So you have basically like your sunlight, you would want to stick in 800 or around. And then if you're in low light situations, I pretty much just immediately jump right to 2500 and just go from there. So the other cool feature on the top of this camera is that it actually now has a dedicated switch for photography, for video, and for slow and quick, which is going to be your slow motion and your time lapses like quick. That is really cool things to no longer you have to like fumble around with the menu switch. With that though, the M, the S, the A, and the P, which is your manual, your shutter priority, your aperture priority, and your program auto, all of those will still work for each setting in photos, video, and slow and quick. You also do have a dedicated C2 button and a record button on the top as well. And you also have the ability to save 3 different settings for memory settings in 1, 2, and 3. And that will independently also save per photo, per video, and per slow and quick. So if you want to set up your camera differently for different frame rates, so on and so on, you can do that now and keep it in memory and then just go to that setting and you're shooting in that setting. And I'm very glad to see that Sony actually added the adjustment wheel to the front of the grip. So now you can actually control things like either your shutter or your aperture from that wheel on the front, as well as also being able to control the shutter or the aperture with that rear wheel on the back as well. And like I said before, this camera does have a dedicated record button. You can control the record button with the shutter as well. There's the C2 button, which is customizable. You can set that up in the menu. And then also on the other side, there is the C1 button. Once again, you can set that up to do pretty much whatever you want it to do in the menu. So now one of the biggest upgrades on this camera is the ability to shoot in 30 frames per second, 60 frames per second, 120 frames per second, all in 4K. So you're going to get all that gorgeous slow motion that the A7S III, the FX3, and all those other cameras have in this camera. Now 120 frames per second does come with a crop, but 60 frames per second and 30 frames per second do not. So in the menu, you can actually change all those settings to the 30, 60, or 120, but you could also use those same settings in the S&Q. So preferably, I like to use the S&Q for slow motion almost entirely because I like the fact that it renders in camera in slow motion. So you don't have to worry about editing 10-bit slow motion in your computer because it can actually be pretty taxing on your computer. So I like to use the S&Q because it renders in camera, and then you can actually see what it looks like while you're viewing it back. The only downside is it does not record sound, so if you do need to record sound, I would use the regular settings. And if you are using a lot of speed ramping from normal speed to slow motion, definitely use the normal settings, not the S&Q, because then you can have regular speed as well. So to me, having that slow motion in 4K for this camera is an absolute game changer. That's what it's been missing all along. Now we have it once again in the A6700. Okay, so you guys probably wonder what the 4K 60 and the 4K 120 actually looks like. It got really windy out here and the water's super high and these waves are just awesome. So we're going to check out the 4K 60 and the 4K 120. I'm going to shoot both in the 1635 G Master and the 85mm Batis just to get those cool detail shots. So let's check out what both of those look like. how good this camera is for photography, all I have to say is it's amazing. Sony absolutely nailed it with the color science on this camera. So while we were in our hotel room, we had a couple visitors who wanted to come check out this new camera. So I quick grabbed it, went outside on the balcony, put it into the eye animal tracking, and I kind of just figured this would be a really good real world test to see like how well it actually is going to track them as they're moving around on the balcony, because they're just kind of zipping around back and forth. So as you can see here, we locked in pretty well. As he leaves the frame, it kind of continues with the focus. As he's kind of climbing up the chair, I get a little bit of lost, but then it gets it right back, jumps to the railing, still in focus. And then in a second here, I'm going to aim up to the other monkey, and once again, he's going to be in focus pretty much immediately. So this thing does a really good job at just tracking those eyes and just staying absolutely sharp and crisp with the face tracking. And then just as a side tip, I would recommend adding in the subject tracking into either a quick button or into your function menu so that it's really easy and quick to get to. So there is a couple things that you do need to know about before you own this camera. Number one is that the SD cards you use on this camera are different than the ones you would use on the other cameras. You are using the UHS-2 V90 or V60 cards. And I say V90 and V60 because you need those to be able to run that 4K slow motion in 10-bit footage. Without that, you're not going to be able to record it. The camera won't even record it at all. So that's going to be one requirement, and they are a little bit more expensive. You're looking at like $120 for like a 128 gigabyte card. And they're going to go up from there. You will find deals on those every now and then, especially on like Black Friday. But the other thing is that you do need to make sure that you have a computer that's going to be able to edit 10-bit footage. So if you guys are running like an older computer, it might not run too well with 10-bit 422 footage because it is a large file and it is kind of taxing on your computer. I did find that out the hard way when I first bought my A7S III. I bought the thing, I did some slow motion, I put it in my computer, I hit spacebar to start it, and it just like froze and almost crashed. That's just because 422 has a lot of data, so you need to have a computer that's going to be capable of that. So if you have like a really old computer that's going to have a hard time with editing, I would maybe hold off on using 10-bit footage. You can shoot this camera in 8-bit, so you can still shoot it like the old style A6000 cameras, but for 10-bit, you are going to need a computer that can handle that. With that said, if you are looking for a computer that can edit this kind of footage better, I would just take a look at some of those new MacBook Pros, like the M1 or the M2 chip. They're going to have absolutely no problem whatsoever editing that. All right, so let's talk about the price of this camera. This comes in at $1,400, which is an absolute steal for what you get in this camera. Having all those features in this camera, and it's like $700 less than the next equivalent in a full-frame version, that's, I mean, kind of a no-brainer for me. So if you're looking for a new camera that has all those features and you don't want to spend $2,200 all the way up to $4,000, this is the camera that you should get. This thing does amazing for photography, it does amazing for videography, and honestly, it's just, I think it's going to be a really good vlogging camera, similar to something like the ZV-E10. And when you pair this with a small compact lens like this Sigma 18-50, you're going to have like one of the smallest little setups, and it's a powerhouse of a camera. I do highly recommend this lens because I do think it's a really good focal length at 18-50, which is going to be about like a 27-75 full frame equivalent. 18 is a tiny bit tight for vlogging, so if you are looking for a lot of vlog content where you're literally turning the camera around at you, maybe looking for something that's lower than 16. They do have that 10-18, which we have used a little bit in this video. They also do have a new 10-20, I believe. There's a few different wide-angle lenses. I'll put some more lenses down below in the description, recommended. But the 18-50 is just kind of a really classic, versatile lens. A large amount of the shots that you saw in this video are actually from this lens, so that kind of gives you an idea of what this lens looks like. Alright guys, so we do got to get back to our vacation, but if you guys have any questions on the A6700 or even on the 18-50 lens, please leave me a comment down below. If this video has been helpful, please hit that like button. While you're down there, if you want to hit that subscribe button, follow along to other content with Sony cameras. And as always guys, we'll catch you on the next one. Later.